Hello and welcome to Newsweek South Asia, a program that talks about breeding of terrorism and its impact on South Asian nations. Let's begin with the headlines first. Pakistan is responsible for growing terrorism in South Asia, say experts. Indian security forces launch a massive anti-terror operation in Kashmir. Taliban pledges to continue fighting Kabul until goals met. Sri Lanka continues to suffer internal instability owing to Easter Sunday bombings. And analysts believe Pakistan's support to Taliban militancy a major roadblock in Afghan peace deal. Time and again, Pakistan has been exposed at various forums for its role in proliferating terrorism in South Asia. In a latest embarrassment to Pakistan, a number of experts in London have named and shamed Pakistan for supporting terrorist outfits in South Asia who don't leave a single stone unturned in bringing chaos in the region. A report.
A number of scholars and journalists who gathered recently in London to discuss the growing menace of terrorism in South Asia and its neighbours have categorically blamed Pakistan for deteriorating peace in the region. The statements came in a seminar which was organized by the Democracy Forum, a non-governmental organization that works intensively to promote the ideals of democracy, pluralism and tolerance. In the light of growing number of terror attacks in South Asia, the seminar focused at the fundamentals of terrorism in the region and its proliferation thereafter. Professor and a counter-terrorism expert Dr. Christine Fair asserted that it was Pakistan which gave birth to terrorism in order to set and achieve its diabolic agenda in the region.
There would be no Pakistan Taliban if there were no Afghan Taliban, if there were no Jaish Mohammad, if there were no Lashkar-e-Jhangvi. In other words, these are all actors that the state has either, in the case of the Taliban and Jaish Mohammad, explicitly groomed and nurtured to kill outside of its borders, and which it has been ambivalent about, Lashkar-e-Jhangvi and Sip-e-Sabe Pakistan, when they kill within its borders.
The United States, which supported Pakistan for years, has long been frustrated by what it sees as Pakistan's reluctance to act against groups such as the Afghan Taliban and the Haqqani network, who they believe exploits safe haven on Pakistani soil to launch attacks in Afghanistan. Amid a growing international pressure, Pakistan proclaimed that it had launched a crackdown against all the terror outfits in Pakistan. However, soon it came out with its template excuse of deficit of funds.
They've been trying to do some cosmetic actions on ground. We saw the UN recently designated Maulana Masood Azhar as a global terrorist who's part of Jaish Mohammad after the whole Balakot and Pulwama incident. After China withdrew its reservations on that. And so because of that, we've seen Jaish Mohammad, which is also reincarnated in many ways and many times, has gone a little bit underground, but they still are there managing a lot of things. We saw that they were going to take over their madrasas and then take over their seminaries and their mosques, Jaish Mohammed's and Lashkar-e-Taibas and all of these Kashmiri militant groups. But then there was a story that recently came out in which they said we don't have the money or the capability or the resources. So they're basically asking for more money, which is what Pakistan does, ask for more money, on ground, do nothing, then keep repeating that cycle. It's been doing that with the Americans for a very long time. Perhaps it'll do that with China now.
Whether it is Washington or Beijing, Pakistan has seemingly lost all its allies, with latest blow coming from China, which gave up on Masood Azhar's designation as global terrorist. Now it becomes imperative for Islamabad to mend its domestic as well as external policies, which were essentially focused at spreading mayhem across its borders. Else the day is not far when it will become a pariah state, languishing in the blacklist of the Financial Action Task Force.
In yet another crackdown on terrorism, Indian security forces launched a massive search and cordon operation in various districts of Jammu and Kashmir, killing more than half a dozen terrorists who had infiltrated into the valley from Pakistan. The neutralized terrorists belong to Jaish Mohammad and Hizbul Mujahideen terror organization, whose leadership are sheltered in Pakistan, from where they carry out their vicious plans against India, a report. Indian security forces neutralized 9 terrorists during an encounter in Jammu and Kashmir this week. The encounters were carried out in Shopian, Sopore and Pulwama districts of Jammu and Kashmir, where the Indian Army had launched a search and cordon operation based on specific inputs about the presence of terrorists.
Early morning there was an input about presence of terrorists in the village. On the basis of that, the forces conducted a search, and while the search was going on, from the hiding terrorists fired upon the forces. The fire was retaliated, and in that 2 terrorists were killed. Arms and ammunition have been recovered from the spot. At present, the forces are doing the final search of the area.
The infiltration of Pakistani terrorists has been a major concern for all the neighboring countries of Pakistan, especially India. Islamabad's cross-border terrorism has remained a major irritant for India since independence. Hence, on several occasions, India has made its stance very clear to Pakistan that until it launches evident counter-terrorism actions against terrorist organizations, India won't get involved into any bilateral meetings with Islamabad.
India has made it absolutely and totally clear that there can be no compromise on India's principal stand, that talks cannot be under the cover of guns. Pakistan has to create an appropriate environment, and what that environment is has been very clearly spelled out to Pakistan, that they will have to cease terrorist activities, they will have to wind up the terrorist training camps, and they will have to stop the infiltration that they do every day or ceasefire violations, and they would have to act in a transparent manner against the perpetrators of Mumbai Kand, Uri, Pathankot, Pulwama, etc. Unless and until they do so, there will be no question of any bilateral talks at all. Pakistan stands fully isolated. There is a huge economic pressure from the World Bank, from the International Monetary Fund, from the United States and FATA, and Pakistan clearly knows that it's on the back foot.
The state-sponsored terrorism by Pakistan is the primary reason behind the up-team level of havoc in South Asia. In a bid to restrict this state-sponsored terrorism, the Indian government has issued orders to suspend trade across the line of control in Jammu and Kashmir. The step aims at the crackdown on all sources of terror funding, as well as stopping the misuse of cross-LOC trade routes by Pakistan-based groups for funneling illegal weapons, narcotics and fake currency. In his annual message on Eid, Taliban leader Hibatullah Akhundzada has declared that an end to the fighting in Afghanistan is not imminent. The statement has come just before US envoy Zalmay Khalilzad's visit to the region in order to pursue peace negotiation in the war-torn country. Hibatullah's statement exactly complements the current situation in Afghanistan, where the terror attacks are only increasing rather than decreasing. Last year, the Taliban had observed a 3-day ceasefire over Eid for the first time since 2001. Considering last year's gesture, this year, Afghan President Ashraf Ghani had proposed a nationwide ceasefire at the start of Ramadan, but the Taliban rejected the offer, and since then, in complete contradiction to its last year's intimation, Taliban has been carrying out incessant attacks in the country, especially during Ramadan. We bring you a report.
The head of the Afghan Taliban, Hibatullah Akhundzada, has pledged to continue fighting until the insurgent group reaches its objectives. In his annual message on Eid al-Fitr, Mullah Hibatullah Akhundzada sought to reassure Afghans that the Taliban wanted an end to decades of conflict and a government that represented all Afghans. But he offered little sign of agreeing to a ceasefire or of opening direct negotiations with the Kabul government, which the Taliban regard as an illegitimate foreign-imposed regime. No one should expect us to pour cold water on the heated battlefronts of jihad or forget our 40-year sacrifices before reaching our objectives, he said in the message, adding that the Taliban aimed for an end to the occupation and establishment of an Islamic system.
It is very evident that Taliban is not willing to concede any space to anybody else other than the Taliban in Afghanistan. They want total control of Afghanistan with them. They are not ready to negotiate with the government because they feel that the government is a puppet of the Western powers. They have opened negotiation channels with the US diplomats. Also, recently a meeting was held in Moscow of intra-Afghan groups. But on all these talks, the Taliban representatives have been insisting that they want complete control of Afghanistan and they do not want any interference.
While Habitullah's message is not really pleasing for the war-torn country, a separate round of talks in Moscow seems to be bringing little good news for the people of Afghanistan. As part of peace negotiations, a Taliban delegation recently met a group of senior Afghan politicians in Moscow, insisting that international forces must leave Afghanistan for peace to be agreed amid gathering diplomatic efforts to end the 18-year war. The delegation, led by Chief Taliban negotiator Mullah Baradar Akhund, met politicians, including senior regional leaders and candidates, challenging President Ashraf Ghani in this year's presidential election. Meetings between the Taliban delegation and political figures not formally associated with the government have been seen as a way of preparing the way for full negotiations later. But those contacts are regarded with deep suspicion by many Afghan officials who see them as undermining the legitimacy of the government while reinforcing the position of the Taliban.
They want a free run in Afghanistan. They want the entire Afghanistan to themselves. They do not want any opposition. They do not want any resistance. They do not like the government forces. They do not like the Afghan army. They want to control Afghanistan through the Taliban and the Taliban fighters. Now, US has made it very clear that US will leave Afghanistan if Taliban gives an assurance that Afghanistan will not be used for the purpose of terrorism. Its soil will not be used. The Taliban are not willing to give. Their intentions are obvious. Similarly, if the forces leave high and dry in between the Afghan, they leave the Afghan government high and dry, and the Americans leave, and the international forces leave, the about 20,000 of which are left in Afghanistan, they leave that, then naturally the way is cleared for the Talibans, and Talibans will have their way, and they will then, the Afghanistan will return to the era where everybody was dreading the Taliban rule.
Habitullah's call for fight seems to have put Taliban insurgents on immediate action. A magnetic bomb blew up a bus carrying government employees in Afghan capital on killing at least 5 people and wounding 10 in a ball of flame.
ما همینجا اسگاه ماست همیشه همینجا استاد میکنیم هم استاد که یک دفعه غرام بسیار صدای شتی آمده موتر من نفرم بود گفتم تا شوی که بریم این زخمی‌ها رو برداریم تیزی کردم خب بالاخره یک دو تا عسکرم اینجا پچی شد نموند ما.
The explosion, the latest in a series of bomb blasts to hit Kabul in recent days, came with the city under the tight security for Eid al-Fitr. While series of terror attacks in Afghanistan continue to disrupt the lives of common people, representatives from Taliban have been talking with US diplomats for months about withdrawing more than 20,000 US and NATO coalition troops in exchange for guarantees that Afghanistan will not be used as a base for terror attacks.
Sri Lanka has become a living example of how a terrorist attack can disrupt the entire functioning of a smooth-running country. The menace of Pakistan-backed terrorism in South Asia, which was still now limited to India, Afghanistan and Pakistan, is now affecting a peaceful country like Sri Lanka, whose entire system is now disturbed due to Easter Sunday terror attacks. Its incumbent president, Maithripala Sirisena, is indicating on not seeking another term in an election owing to the large-scale internal criticism faced by him following the Easter Sunday bombings. Also, in a separate move, all 9 Muslim ministers in Sri Lanka's government and 2 Muslim provincial governors resigned from their posts as the fragile Buddhist majority country grapples with the communal backlash of the Easter Sunday bombings that killed as many as 250 people. Sri Lanka, which has already faced the dark days of civil war, is now moving towards another political and social upheaval. In this episode of Newsweek South Asia, we will give you a glimpse of how terrorism has broken the backbone of many South Asian nations, Sri Lanka being the newest entry to the group. A report.
As if South Asia was already not suffering less from Pakistan's internal instability, Sri Lanka has now entered the same league because of Islamabad-sponsored terrorism backed by its ISI that led to the execution of Easter Sunday bombings. For the past decade after the civil war in Sri Lanka, the domestic situation has been so stable that the government believed the country was immune to terrorism. Hence, it was a rude awakening when the country was blitzed by multiple suicide attacks on Easter Sunday on 21st April 2019, resulting in fatalities. Sri Lanka is the latest addition to the list of countries who have suffered political, material and social losses due to Pakistan's state-sponsored terrorism. From past several years, India and Afghanistan remain at the constant targets of terrorist groups which have found safe haven in Pakistan.
Pakistanis were active or overactive, shall I say, apart from India, in Bangladesh and Afghanistan. India and Afghanistan were most vitally affected by the act of terrorism. Bangladesh also started getting affected. And you remember the last SAARC summit when we said we won't attend, they also decided not to attend, and Afghanistan also. But this is the first time that this Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, which they blame the ISIS for it, but it doesn't matter. As far as the present situation is concerned, they're both the same. They're one and the same. I think the Sri Lankans know very well the sponsorship has been by Pakistan, but they are not prepared at the moment to blame Pakistan for it, in the hope that this is the last time it will happen. So we have to be careful about it and keep this in mind.
Following Easter Sunday attacks, Sri Lanka is fighting hard to come back to normalcy. While its citizens are trying their best to return to their normal lives, the country's political scenario is suffering from a tough time. In a latest setback to Sri Lankan establishment, President Maithripala Sirisena said that he is uncertain about contesting the upcoming elections. He said this in an interaction with Sri Lankan local media. President Sirisena has faced criticism over his leadership after a string of deadly suicide bombings which killed more than 250 people in the island nation on April 21st. Sirisena's absence will leave a deep vacuum in the Sri Lankan government as the President and Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe had recently come on the same boat in tackling the menace of terrorism.
බලවතුන් වෙන්න පුළුවන් කුඩා රටවල් වෙන්න පුළුවන් සෑම කෙනෙක්ම ත්‍රස්තවාදයට එකතු වීම තුළ තමයි ත්‍රස්තවාදය පරාජය කළ හැක්කේ.
Following the Easter Sunday bombings, Sri Lanka's Industry Minister Rishad Bathiuddin is being accused of supporting Islamic terrorism in the country. Although the minister has resigned, but his resignation has brought political upsurge in the country as 8 Muslim government officials in Sri Lanka have quit their portfolios in solidarity with the industry minister, who has been accused of supporting the Islamic hardliners in the country.
This has been outsourced to the ISI, who know probably Sri Lanka better, to take care of this. And so I'm quite sure of that. And secondly, their role is complete. They'll never admit it, actually. They'll not try to blame people. They may even blame India. You never know. The RAW has done it, and blaming Pakistan. So I don't be surprised if that happens, but they'll have to do it. Sri Lanka government, unfortunately or as they see it, is blaming only one community for it because all the people they investigated and arrested have belonged to only that community. All the same as in India and elsewhere.
Being transnational and borderless, terrorism is trying to undermine social harmony of countries with a multicultural society such as Sri Lanka and India in South Asia. Pakistan is playing an unpardonable role in this mission of jihadi terrorists by being a safe house for all the dreaded terrorist groups. A latest addition to its list of evil state guests is ISIS, which has officially announced a new Pakistan province just few weeks back.
US has been laying immense efforts in striking a peace deal between Afghanistan government and Taliban, but their process seems to have missed a major roadblock, Pakistan. For years, Pakistan has not given up on Taliban militants who have perpetrated attacks on Afghan security personnel and US troops in order to maintain a warlike situation at all times. Analysts suggest that peace might not prevail in Afghanistan unless Taliban militants and its aid Pakistan are dealt at first, a report.
Giving a further push to ongoing peace talks with Taliban, US Special Envoy Zalmay Khalilzad recently addressed a meeting in Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., reviving pre-9/11 formula to legitimate Taliban rule in exchange for a Taliban pledge to close terror camps. The plan, however, proposed to bring stability in the war-torn Afghanistan, undermines the legitimacy of elected Afghan government and discounts Taliban's long history of insincere diplomacy. It also ignores the role of Pakistan in rearing Taliban militants in Afghanistan, a missing piece to Khalilzad's strategy.
Pakistan has deliberately, promoted number of groups among the Taliban. So if one group goes for negotiations, other would carry forward arms struggle. Basically, they are the Pakistan's proxy, and Pakistan interest is not in establishing peace and stability in Afghanistan.
After Soviet invasion in Afghanistan, Pakistan has been an unrelenting support to Taliban militancy that at times recoiled against its own fiefdom. Nevertheless, Pakistan channeled its aid exclusively to Taliban rather than nationalist Afghan groups who were envisioning a democratic republican Afghanistan. However, Pakistani diplomats and political heavyweights have made several remarks denying their support to terrorism in past. The Pakistan ISI has continued to support Taliban and more radical groups operating in Afghanistan and more broadly against the United States.
Need is to build pressure on Pakistan to give up its policy of supporting militancy. By negotiating with Taliban will not help solve the problem. The key to the problem lies in Pakistan. Islamabad is the factor. And Islamabad will listen only when pressure builds up. Taliban are being backed by Pakistan. They are being trained, funded by Pakistani military establishment. And the Taliban Shura is based in Pakistan, Quetta city. And their camps are being organized by the Pakistani military establishment. So that is a roadblock. But on the other side, this government, is getting stronger day by day. It has the support of the local people. There are many, drawbacks, but still, the people want the democratic rule to continue in Afghanistan. They don't want Taliban-backed Islamic regime to be installed.
As far as US is concerned, not Donald Trump or any American electorate wants to stay in Afghanistan into perpetuity at an annual cost of more than $30 billion. If the Afghan peace process is to succeed, then the United States must bring the full weight on Pakistan in order to win a cessation of Pakistani support to Taliban militancy.
And with that, we come to the end of this edition of Newsweek South Asia. We will be back next week with more news, views and analysis from the subcontinent. Meanwhile, do keep writing to us at nwsa@aniin.com. This is Surabhi Sharma signing off on the behalf of entire production team of Newsweek South Asia. Goodbye and take care.